Since the fall of Syria's Assad regime last December, no two countries have paid more attention to Syria than Israel and Turkey, much to each other's frustration. Israel has accused Turkey of trying to turn Syria into a Turkish protectorate, while Turkey says Israel is the greatest threat to regional security. So in this video, we're going to explain the opposing plans that Israel and Turkey have for Syria, why it's making their already hostile relationship worse, and assess whether it could lead to conflict between the two regional powers. Who's the most influential person in the world? Well, we asked the TLDR team and audience to rank a bunch of powerful people, and we have the results. Find out the full list in the next copy of our magazine, Too Long. Pre-order a copy by clicking the link in the description. To understand what's going on, it's worth starting by taking a look at how the Turkish-Israeli relationship has developed. We don't need to go too much into the history, but the TLDR is that Israel-Turkey relations have had plenty of ups and downs since Turkey became the first Muslim-majority country to establish ties with Israel back in 1949. Fast forward to the late 2000s and early 2010s, and the relationship was at a real low following the 2008-2009 Gaza war and Israel's deadly raid of a Turkish civilian aid flotilla in 2010. Things remained pretty bad through the 2010s, but by 2022, the relationship rebounded, with full diplomatic ties restored, and Turkey eyeing joint energy projects with Israel in the Mediterranean. Relations were at a relatively high point, but this rapprochement was short-lived, as relations have collapsed since the October 7th attack and the subsequent Gaza war. However, the hostility between the two countries over what was, and still is happening in Gaza, has largely played out as a war of words, trade restrictions and legal battles, with Turkey backing the South African-led genocide case against Israel at the ICJ. But since the overthrow of Assad in early December last year, Syria has become the new battleground, over which Turkey and Israel are sparring, and no longer just rhetorically either. For example, last week, Israel bombed a number of air bases in Syria that Turkish officials had recently been scoping out as potential bases for Turkish troops to deploy as part of a planned joint defence pact with Syria, a prospect that Israel sees as posing a threat to its own freedom of action in Syria. Israel seemingly carried out the strikes in what it saw as a limited window of opportunity to act and render the bases unusable before Turkey moved its military assets in. So, while not a direct attack on Turkey, it was a clear message. The Israeli foreign minister later accused Turkey of playing a negative role in Syria and warned Syria's president Ahmed al-Sharaa that if he allowed unspecified, quote, hostile forces to enter Syria and threaten Israeli security interests, then he would pay a heavy price. So, what are the competing views that Turkey and Israel have over post-Assad Syria? The overthrow of Assad has provided a significant opportunity for cooperation between Turkey and the new Syrian government, not least because the Turkish government had been a long-standing supporter of the Syrian opposition and already had a cooperative relationship with the victorious HTS Islamist rebel group. The Turkish government has engaged more with the new Syrian authorities than perhaps any other government, and Turkey is primed to play a crucial role in the rebuilding of the devastated country. This comes with several clear benefits for Turkey. First, it provides business opportunities for Turkish companies, especially construction firms. Second, it gives Turkey an important ally in dealing with its own security concerns, namely the Kurdish-led forces based in Syria's northeast and remnants of ISIS. Third, it opens the door for the Turkish military to expand its footprint and sphere of influence. And fourth, helps foster the conditions for the return of Syrian refugees from Turkey. So, with all these things in mind, it's evidently in Turkey's interest for post-Assad Syria to be united and secure under al-Sharaa. However, from the Israeli side, things were obviously viewed differently. At face value, the toppling of Assad looks like great news for Israel. After all, Assad was an ally of Iran, Israel's sworn enemy, and it was Israel, through its wrecking of Hezbollah, that helped lay the groundwork for Assad's downfall. But the ascendancy of al-Sharaa, a former al-Qaeda militant and friend of Turkey, was met with concern in Israel, which clearly does not buy into the idea that al-Sharaa has moderated and wants to build a friendly, inclusive Syria that doesn't pose a threat to its neighbours. In fact, Israel's foreign minister, referring to Syria's new rulers, has said they were jihadists and remain jihadists, even if some of their leaders have donned suits. As Syria analyst Charles Lister writes, in the 10 days after Assad was ousted, the Israeli military launched more than 600 airstrikes across Syria, seeking to destroy the military infrastructure and weapons stockpiles of the former regime, preventing them from falling into the hands of what it considers hostile forces. The Israeli military also invaded the buffer zone on the boundary with Syria and has subsequently pushed at least 12 kilometers into Syrian territory, with the Israeli military indicating that its presence in southern Syria will be indefinite, having established itself in several outposts from which it can conduct raids. Israel has demanded the complete demilitarization of southern Syria and has also made overtures to southern Syria's Druze community, seeking to justify its intervention in Syria by expressing its intention to protect the minority group. So, while Turkey wants to see a unified Syria under a strong central government led by an empowered President al-Sharaa, as the transitional constitution he signed aims to establish, Israel would prefer to see something much different. A more fragmented Syria, divided up into ethnically autonomous regions with a weaker central government unable to deter Israeli action. The Israeli government's logic is that this kind of Syria would pose less of a threat to Israel than the one being established by the new Syrian authorities. Although there are some obvious counters to this, not least the fact that the Israeli approach could risk heightening intercommunal tensions, and a weaker central government could provide an opening for an adversary, say Iran, to exploit. But that's an argument for another time. The main question now is, where do Israel and Turkey go from here? Will their tension escalate into conflict? Well, a direct conflict looks unlikely, as both sides do appear keen to avoid that outcome. According to at least one report, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is said to have made clear that Israel's recent strikes on Syrian air bases could not go ahead if Turkish assets had already been deployed, and the two sides are holding talks on deconfliction. But we shouldn't discount the possibility for the relationship to deteriorate further, especially because both Netanyahu and Erdogan have a long history of animosity and aren't known for rhetorical restraint. It's also worth remembering, though, that despite their hostile relationship, Turkey and Israel do share a mutual ally, the United States, and both countries are seeking to leverage their alliance with the US in their respective favour. Donald Trump seems optimistic that he can play a mediating role, saying to Netanyahu recently that any problem that you have with Turkey, I think we can solve, as long as you are reasonable. This story, like much of the news, is worth paying attention to in the weeks ahead, because with geopolitics in flux and Trump throwing the international order up in the air, there's a lot to keep an eye on. Every day we're faced with weird headlines, from Musk declaring anyone who looks at him the wrong way a terrorist, to Trump declaring war on Jupiter to try to regain some extraterrestrial allies. Okay, that one isn't real, but we do dive into the weird world of US politics in our series WTF USA. That's our show where we take big moments from culture and social media and try to explain the political implications of, say, Musk running around trying to put out Tesla fires. Unlike some of our other serious videos, the tone of WTF is more light-hearted and takes something of an irreverent look at what's going on. If you're interested, WTF USA can be found exclusively on Nebula. Nebula is the home to other incredible original content from your favourite creators, like Real Life Law's series War Room. Given how much conflict and geopolitical disagreements there is right now, it's hard to stay on top of everything that's happening. So the show attempts to get you up to speed every month, explaining everything that you've missed and helping you feel more informed. If you didn't know, Nebula is an independent, creator-owned streaming platform that specialises in thoughtful content, from creators like Real Life Law, Wendover Productions, Legal Eagle, and Neo. It's not just WTF USA either. You can also watch every normal TLDR video on Nebula ad-free, and in some instances before they even land on YouTube. If you're not a member already, click our link in the description to get 40% off. That's just $36 a year or $3 a month. So take the news a little less seriously and check out WTF only on Nebula.